The Forgotten Killer. It was another late-night shift at the hospital, the kind where time seemed to stretch endlessly, and the corridors echoed with the quiet hum of machinery. As a nurse, I was accustomed to the eerie stillness that settled over the building after visiting hours were long over. But little did I know, that night would be unlike any other. As I made my rounds, checking on patients and ensuring everything was in order, I noticed a figure huddled in the corner of the hallway. At first, I assumed it was just a visitor waiting for their loved one. But as I drew closer, a chill crept down my spine. The man was old, his face weathered with age and his eyes clouded with confusion. He rocked back and forth, muttering to himself incoherently. Something about his demeanor sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed aside my unease and approached him cautiously. "Sir, are you all right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes flickering with recognition before clouding over once again. "I don't know," he mumbled, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't remember." I frowned, puzzled by his response. But before I could press him further, a commotion erupted from one of the patient rooms down the hall. Hastening to investigate, I found a scene straight out of a nightmare. A young man lay sprawled on the bed, his body covered in bruises and blood. It was clear he had been the victim of a brutal assault. Shocked and horrified, I called for help, summoning the doctors and alerting the authorities. As the chaos unfolded around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The old man in the hallway. He was the key to unlocking the mystery surrounding the attack. Returning to his side, I pressed him for answers, desperate to uncover the truth. But all he could offer were fragmented memories, fleeting glimpses of a past stained with violence and betrayal. It wasn't until the police arrived that the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The old man, it turned out, was the victim's grandfather. And as they questioned him, he confessed to a crime so heinous, it sent shockwaves through the entire hospital. He had murdered his own son. But in a cruel twist of fate, the passage of time had clouded his memory, leaving him haunted by fragments of a past he could no longer fully recall. As I watched the police lead him away, his eyes filled with confusion and regret, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of sadness. In the end, it wasn't just the victim who had suffered at the hands of his grandfather's forgotten deeds. It was all of us. The Imposters Next Door. As a kid, I always heard stories about my grandparents' house. It was described as cozy, with a white picket fence and a sprawling garden out back. But despite the vivid tales, I had never visited them alone. That all changed one summer when my parents decided it was time for me to spend a few days with them. I remember the excitement tinged with nervousness as my parents dropped me off. The suburban neighborhood seemed quiet and peaceful, just as they had described it. As I approached the house, I noticed the curtains twitching in the window, as if someone was peering out at me. I shrugged it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Entering the house, I was greeted by a warm, musty smell that instantly reminded me of my childhood. The furniture was old-fashioned but well-kept, and family photos adorned the walls. Everything seemed perfectly normal, at least at first glance. The days passed by in a blur of routine. My grandparents doted on me, showering me with attention and affection. But as the hours turned into days, I began to notice strange inconsistencies. They would often forget details about my parents or my own life, and their behavior grew increasingly erratic. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Curious, I crept out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway. Peeking around the corner, I saw my grandparents huddled together, whispering urgently. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the fear in their voices sent shivers down my spine. Doubt began to gnaw at me. Who were these people really? And why did they seem so invested in keeping me here? The next morning, I decided to confront them. As I entered the kitchen, I found them sitting at the table, their expressions tense. I demanded answers, but instead of responding, they exchanged uneasy glances. That's when the truth finally came out. They weren't my grandparents at all. They were imposters, posing as my family members for reasons unknown. Shock and disbelief washed over me as I struggled to process the revelation. How long had they been pretending, and what did they want from me? In a panic, I reached for the phone to call my parents, but the imposters stopped me, their faces contorted with anger. It was clear they would do anything to keep me from leaving. Just as I began to fear for my safety, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Relief flooded through me as I realized it was my parents. Rushing outside, I clung to them tightly, tears streaming down my face as I recounted the nightmare I had endured. It took months for me to fully come to terms with what had happened. The betrayal cut deep, leaving me with trust issues that lingered long after the ordeal was over. But through it all, I found solace in the knowledge that I had escaped the clutches of those imposters, and that I was finally safe once again. The woman on the bench. It was one of those long nights at work, the kind that leaves you feeling drained and weary to your bones. As I trudged home from my night shift, the street lamps cast eerie shadows across the deserted sidewalk. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic, punctuated by the occasional rustle of leaves in the cold night breeze. As I rounded the corner onto my street, I noticed her sitting alone on the bench, a woman, shrouded in darkness, her silhouette barely visible against the night. At first, I didn't pay her much mind, assuming she was just another late-night wanderer seeking solace in the solitude of the night. But as I drew closer, a sense of unease crept over me. There was something off about her, something that sent a shiver down my spine. Her posture was rigid, her eyes fixed straight ahead as if she were lost in thought. But it was her aura of quiet intensity that unnerved me the most. Ignoring the prickling sensation at the back of my neck, I quickened my pace, eager to reach the safety of my own home. But as I passed by the bench, she turned her head, her gaze locking onto mine with a chilling intensity. "Hello," she said, her voice soft but filled with an otherworldly resonance. I forced a polite nod, my heart pounding in my chest as I continued on my way. But her words lingered in the air, echoing in my mind long after I had left her behind. The next night, as I made my way home from work once again, I found myself passing by the same bench. And there she was, the woman with the haunting eyes, her presence like a weight upon my soul. This time, I couldn't bring myself to look away. Her gaze held me captive, drawing me closer with an irresistible pull, and as I stood before her, I felt a wave of fear wash over me, threatening to consume me whole. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, a twisted mockery of warmth that sent a chill down my spine. "I've been waiting for you," she replied, her words dripping with sinister intent. I wanted to flee, to run as far away from her as possible. But something held me in place, rooted to the spot as if by invisible chains. And then, without warning, she lunged at me, her fingers clawing at my flesh with inhuman strength. With a cry of terror, I stumbled backward, scrambling to escape her grasp. But she was relentless, her grip like a vice as she dragged me towards the darkness that lurked beyond the streetlights. Desperate and afraid, I fought with all my strength, my screams echoing in the empty night. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The police, drawn by the commotion, arrived just in time to save me from the clutches of the woman on the bench. As they pulled her away, her eyes burned with a hatred that chilled me to the core. And as I watched her disappear into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was just the beginning of something far more sinister. But one thing was for certain. I would never walk that street alone again. If you enjoyed getting spooked with us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to stay updated on all our eerie stories. Feel free to leave a comment down below about your own creepy encounters. Until next time, stay spooky, stay curious, and welcome to the Creepy Club.